Here we are, we're reviewing for the quarter 3 final. Let's take a look at number 1 here. The first thing that we check for is greatest common factor. So I'm going to factor out 12x out of the whole thing, leaving me with 2x squared minus 1. For number 2 here, the only thing that we know how to do when there's 4 terms is to factor it by grouping. So let's take the greatest common factor of the first grouping, taking out the x, leaving me with x squared minus 6. In the second one, there is no greatest common factor, so we're going to take out a 1, leaving us with x squared minus 6. Notice that the two things in the parentheses are the same, so we can regroup this by writing x squared minus 6 times the quantity of x plus 1. For number 3, we are looking for the factors of negative 18 that add up to negative 7. Let's make our list. Negative 1 and 18, negative 2 and 9. That would give me positive 7. So if I reverse them, negative 9 and 2 gives me negative 7. Let's take x minus 9 and x plus 2. To double check, we can do the inside times inside and outside times outside. Negative 9x and positive 2x equals negative 7. Number 4. Notice that this one has a coefficient in front of the x squared term, so I'm going to use the a times c method. I get negative 24. What are my factors of negative 24 that add up to negative 8 or negative 5? I'm going to use negative 8 and 3. I'm going to split my middle term using those numbers and then factor it by grouping. Greatest common factor of the first one is the 2x, leaving me with x minus 4. Greatest common factor of the second one is 3, leaving me with x minus 4. Regrouping, I get x minus 4 times the quantity of 2x plus 3. For number 5, notice it has two terms with a minus between it. Makes me think it's the difference of squares pattern, but these aren't perfect squares. So I'm going to take out the greatest common factor first, leaving me with x squared minus 49. Now those are both perfect squares, so I'm going to use the difference of squares pattern. Square root of the first term in both front positions, square root of the last term in both back positions. One is plus, one is minus. For number 6, it looks like the difference of squares pattern, but it's a plus sign in between there. There is no pattern for factoring to the sum of squares, so we're going to say not factorable. For number 7, we have a cubic plus a cubic. So this is the cubic pattern that we learned. So I'm going to factor it into a cube root of the first term, which is 2y, cube root of the last term, which is 5. Sign stays the same. To get the trinomial part of it, we have to square the first term, which gives me 4y squared. Multiply them together, and it's the opposite sign of this one, which gives me 10y, and then square my last term, which is plus 25. Now let's look at the signs and see if it follows our SOAP. The first sign is the same as the original, the next sign is the opposite, and the last one is always positive. For number 8, same type of thing with a minus sign between it, so I'm going to take the cube root of the first term, gives me 3x. Cube root of my last term is 4. The sign in between it will be the same. Square my first term, 9x squared. Multiply them together. Opposite of this sign, so I'm going to have positive 12x. And then squaring my last one is 16. For number 9, again we have a coefficient in front of the squared term, so I'm going to use my a times my c. I get 30. My factors of 30 that add up to 11 are 6 and 5. I'm going to split my middle term using those factors and factor it by grouping. Greatest common factor of the first grouping is a 2x, leaving me with 5x plus 3. There's no greatest common factor, so I'm going to bring out the 1. And since these are the same, I'm going to rewrite it as such. For number 10, since it's already in factored form equal to 0, all we have to do is set the two parts equal to 0 and solve them. I'm going to subtract the 2, giving me 3x equals negative 2. Divide by 3, divide by 3. Over here, all I have to do is add 5 to both sides. And remember, the answers go in those fancy brackets. That means it's a list of answers. In the second one, since it doesn't say equals 0, we're going to have to move that to the other side to make it say equals 0. Otherwise, this doesn't work. So I'm going to distribute this, and I get 3x squared plus 13x. And then I'm going to add 4 to both sides, which is going to give me 0 on the right-hand side. Now we're in the situation where we have an a times c situation. And 12, the factors of 12 that add up to 13 would be 12 and 1. Let's rewrite our middle term as 12x and 1x, and then factor that by grouping. Greatest common factor is 3x, leaving me with x plus 4. I'm going to bring the 1 out of the second grouping, leaving me with x plus 4. And I'm going to rewrite it as 3x plus 1, x plus 4. And since it says equals 0, we're going to have to set each of those equal to 0. And when I set them equal to 0, I am going to get negative 1/3 and negative 4. For this one, since there's no factors in front of the x squared, we're just looking for the factors of 12 that add up to 7. Let's see, it does 2 and 6 doesn't work. Let's try 3 and 4. That one works. So all we have to do is write x plus 3, x plus 4. And when I set those equal to 0, I get x equals negative 3 and x equals negative 4. And again, we put them in the fancy brackets that reminds us that that's a list of answers. Negative 3 and negative 4. On the bottom here, if you look at your cards in the cube root column, we know that the cube root of 125 is 5, because 5 times 5 times 5 equals 125, and you need to have a group of 3 factors to bring it out. For number 14, we're going to split 12 into 4 times 3. X to the 4th is going to come out in total because it's an even exponent. But y to the 7th we're going to break into y to the 6th times y. Let's bring out the 4. I get a 2 out front. Let's bring out the x to the 4th. The square root of x to the 4th is x squared. The square root of y to the 6th gives me y cubed. And we have some leftovers that stay inside the radical of 3 and y. For number 15, remember the top number is the power and the bottom number is the root. So I'm going to be taking the 4th root of 81. I'm going to take that answer and cube it. 4th root. So the 4th root of 81 is 3. 3 cubed is 27. For number 16, it's the same kind of thing except for it's a fraction. If you notice, we can simplify the fraction even before we start the powers. So I'm going to simplify. 3 over 27 simplifies to 1/9. Remember, the bottom number is the root, top number is the power. So I'm going to take the square root of 1/9, get that answer, and cube it. I'm going to split the 1/9 into the square root of 1 over the square root of 9. And then I'm going to find that answer and cube it. The square root of 1 is 1. The square root of 9 is 3. And if I cube both of those, I get 1 over 27. Now for the back of your page.